Isn't it a strange feeling to deeply miss someone you have never met?
I'm Tim.
Whether it's the idea of them, whether it's the artist they were, or the figure they were within a community.
This name popped up, Avicii.
Said, have you ever heard of a guy named Avicii?
He's the one.
Some of us dance and sing to ABBA and Avicii.
Avicii!
It's so hard to come to terms with the idea that a figure that's an icon for you wasn't enough for themselves. The recent Netflix documentary on Avicii has been watched by millions of people worldwide, and 5 of his songs are in the top 10 on Billboard right now, years after his death. There are millions around the world who still miss him despite the fact that none of us have ever met him. Yet despite this, there's this longing globally, except we didn't know the person. We never knew the person, he was quite a private person really. So given that the music still exists and you can still listen to it, it's odd to think it's the art that we miss, because the art's preserved. I personally have a special not relationship with Tim because he's sort of the yin to my yang, and I'll explain that as we go on.
Timeless music. That's what I'm trying to make.
When I started writing this script, I'd been sitting up all night, getting ready to watch that documentary with my wife, and listening to all of his old songs over and over and over again, thinking through both his story and mine and the weird ways they kind of relate to each other. And somehow, I feel like I have this very personal connection despite the fact that we've never met, and obviously now never will. I want to preface this by saying, I'm not saying I'm as good as Avicii was, or anywhere near. More that my failures should hopefully show you how impressive this guy's career actually was. Rewind back to 2011. Avicii was just starting to reach superstardom status. Little old me had just got his first music production software. He'd shot to industry attention by winning a remix contest with, I think it was like 70 to 80% in the vote, and meanwhile, I came back from school one day with my mother sheepishly looking at me, and she'd got a phone call from someone claiming to be from MTV. Now, months earlier, having not really thought about it, I threw a song into a music contest. I was underage to enter the contest, so I did what everyone does in that situation and put a 1 year further back birthday in. And my song had apparently won. The whole thing. It won. I was going to be a superstar. I was going to be rich. I was going to be on stage at a big festival. What age is he? Can we check he's of the right age? My mother gave the true answer, which was I would be of the right age in a couple months. And I was just called. Now, while I ultimately wasn't as mega talented as Avicii was, and I was completely incapable of in any way marketing my music ever, I ended up never getting anywhere close to making it. I had a far more normal music career experience, which is getting rebuffed again and again and again. Sadly, that's how it goes for most mere mortals. So it's really bizarre for someone like me to watch someone who was essentially an idol, example of what could happen if everything went right for you, icon in the industry.
I was a lot happier before I was famous than after I was famous.
Be so massively unhappy with my dream life that he couldn't go on.
Breaking news, EDM star Avicii has died. He was found dead in the city of Muscat.
And as melodramatic as it might sound, to me he was like a shadow, like a exemplar of what could have been achieved had I been better. He represented the success that I wasn't. I wrote a lot of this script before actually watching the documentary, but I'll give my kind of brief little takeaways from the documentary now. It did ruin a lot of my hipster little things about the songs I knew before he got big, or the fact that his Ultra set got booed. I thought it was going to be really clever and cool, adding all these tidbits for people, and then the documentary covered it, because of course it did. One of the things that's amazing to me, and maybe it shouldn't be, is how incredibly similar I am to him in more ways than I assumed. The first one that hit me is him saying
I've always been like a night owl, always. At night, no one else is kind of bothering you. Like I was just working.
Which is something I've said for years. I think every song I've ever made, I've made at night. There's also things that aren't similar to me, things I didn't have. I never found the agent, and it's one of the things I wonder sometimes if going to that music festival that I've quote-unquote won the place to, if I might have met the agent there, or if in some other time I might have had a break that led to that.
I also want to thank my manager Ash, who's been with me since day one, and I wouldn't be standing here if it wasn't for him. So thank you all very much.
It seems that he wouldn't have been particularly comfortable promoting himself either, and so as much as agents can be a bit of a parasite in the music world, it seemed to benefit him, at least very much at the start.
He was just very kind of straightforward, saying, if you let me help you, like, I'll make you one of the biggest DJs in the world in the next year.
Another thing is he had people to bounce his work off of. He had a friend who was also into electronic music who he could constantly share stuff with, which again, I didn't really have. He talks about developing an alcohol problem, and it's something I very nearly did too for the same reasons. For those who've never DJ'd, it might not be obvious why, but I think most DJs will understand the idea that having a couple of drinks before you go on makes it so much more fun.
I realized how stiff I was when I wasn't drinking. So then I found the magical cure of just having like a couple of drinks before going on, which would mean that would loosen you up and would make it a whole nother experience.
You're way more into it, it's way more free, and especially if you are a little bit of an anxious personality. It's very easy if you're DJing night after night for that to become a crutch. In my own case, at university, I was drinking basically every night, DJing flat parties. Even if I wasn't DJing, I was at a friend's flat just hanging out. And I had a day where I came out of a lecture thinking I need a drink. Not I want a drink, I need a drink. And that was such a scary moment for me because I knew what that was, what that represented, what path I was going down. And so I instantly went, no, I'm not doing that, and quit drinking for 3 weeks just to reset, basically. And thankfully for me, that's worked out fine, and I've never been close to being over that edge again. But had I been DJing every single night, flying from show to show on the kind of schedule he was on, this is very easily something I could have fallen into, especially if I wasn't aware of myself because I was tired, because I was always on the move.
I knew that the touring was really having a toll. I knew he hated it. I knew that he had gotten himself in a series of commitments that he couldn't get out of.
And that schedule is hellish, by the way. Him getting burnt out in the schedule is not a surprise. We all kind of knew it happened. He's hardly the first, and he'll unfortunately hardly be the last. If you don't know what DJs, professional DJs, no matter how big they are or how well off you think they have it, their actual life touring is fly to hotel room, sleep if they can, go to show, play show, come back from show, either go to hotel room or fly. Repeat.
The business is hard. It's not that the industry is mean or that, you know, that anyone's really out to get Tim. It's just a lot of work to be the CEO of being a superstar.
They generally don't get to go and explore cities, have fun, meet new people, explore cultures, do much of any of that.
I started realizing that, yeah, the life the way it wasn't for me.
One of the things about the nightlife industry is it's very cold, calculating. Frankly, it's very fake. There's a lot of people out there who are in it for themselves entirely, and you only matter to them as far as you're bringing them something of value. Maybe some of you might say the whole world's like that, but trust me, this industry is very barefaced and very, it's brutal. And some outsiders always ask why artists pay agents so much money. It's to deal with this side of it. It's to not have to talk to people like that. It's to not have to look it in the eye. It's to be able to stay an artist and stay detached from that cynical world that will absolutely kill your creative flair if you have to deal with it too long. The abyss will look back into you, and it's poisonous.
Jag tänkte hela tiden på att låten skulle vara så effektiv som möjligt. Man skulle älska låten och sen ska man spela den igen. Så att man skulle, det då, när jag hör vad jag säger så det handlar mer om, det handlar inte om konst, det handlar om att komma så högt som möjligt på topplistorna. Det låter ju, vilken cynisk människa jag är. Medan Tim vill göra konst, ja det hör jag själv. Det låter ju förjävligt.
The most important thing for you as an artist is to stay in that kind of creative zone, stay happy in making music and enjoying what you do, and most people can't do that while dealing with that other side. That's why everyone ends up getting an agent. And you can tell he'd sort of been too exposed to that system, whether it was just talking to his agent or things that went directly to him, whatever it was. But you can see it that he felt he speaks about feeling a sort of hollowness, feeling like he was just running around for other people's interests, a sort of rat in a maze stuck in the system. And it's funny because those of you who know me and know some of my previous videos and what things I've said is that that's a sentiment I've held for years. The story of my life to this point could be described as the boy who was trying to escape. I always hated feeling trapped, always hated feeling like a rat in a maze, wasting the little life I have for someone else's design. But it wasn't really necessarily about this field, it was more about finance industry or about corporate jobs. It was about how I felt pushed in many ways in my life into certain directions. And it's funny and it's quite sad to see this sort of feeling in someone else, especially when it's a place that I thought I would have loved to be. And ultimately, he's a kid who's been torn from his quiet little home in Sweden to being flown all over the world, being idolized by people around the world, being this object of attention, which he's not really the personality type to be.
I kind of went from being young, a kid, you know, from school, to being like kind of straight out into touring.
He's in that hellish touring schedule with no roots, no settled anything, completely displaced in every sense of the word. It's just sad to watch. Quick side note, it's quite funny that while he was touring, there's a kind of famous video in DJ circles of him producing on his laptop in a car, and you can see that he's got a illegally downloaded version of a synth called Silent that was like Team Air or something, cracked by Team Air. And it's very funny that he talks about, oh, it's so easy to get everything and start producing nowadays. It is, don't get me wrong, but it's especially easy if you are doing what everyone does and has done traditionally, which is get cracked versions of softwares. But it's also notable in his workflow that he says himself he's not a technical producer really. He gets the idea of how things sound, doesn't really care about how they work necessarily, just wants to get his sound.
Yeah, I've never been very technical at all. I've always been very much more about, like, if I tweak this, it sounds good. And if I do this, it sounds good. I've always been more like that.
You can see throughout the whole thing, he's really more of a songwriter than anything else. He's not a hugely experimental sound designer. He's more of a guy who just writes a melody and then finds something that works for it, that gets a sound he likes. He explores through presets and synthesizers. He doesn't really tend to make something from scratch. One little story is when all of the song kind of comes together really, really quickly, you finish the project, which is something that he was actually kind of famous for in the industry. If you ask Chris Martin and other people, that his speed, the speed he works at is incredible.
Tim being Tim, even though he had 50,000 projects that day, he still found time. In half an hour, he kind of did the whole thing. It was amazing. Almost a panic way of working. It's like, I need to get this done because then another thing's calling and you can never get it all done.
And it is a thing that I'm sure a lot of artists can relate to. I mean, I can. I've had songs that have come out really quickly. I had in a much smaller way, a hit song in a little niche video game community that basically it was a sort of semi-jokey song about how a certain character was way too strong and all this kind of stuff. And my friend, who's a professional streamer, I sent him this song and he started looping it on his stream because he liked it so much.
And then we they lied, and we lied, then we they lied, and we lied, then we they lied, and we lied, then we they lied, and we lied.
And that night I finished the song because I was watching him enjoy so much and that inspired me. And so he couldn't believe that I'd finished the whole track in the time between when he'd started streaming, looping it, using this character, and the time at which it took him to play a few games. And oh wait, you finished it? So it's something I can relate to, people being amazed when you're really inspired, you fire through the whole thing, all your neurons are going, you know, mega brain achieved. It's something I definitely miss about music production, that feeling of being in a flow state, really, because that's ultimately what it is. It's an inspiring thing.
When it's just free, when it's just music, then I love it.
We now reach the part of the documentary. It's called We Know Americans Made This Documentary. And then one of the ways we know that is because Ultra gets presented as the #1 festival in the world.
Ultra Music Festival in Miami is the key global destination in the world of dance music, not only for fans, but for dance music artists.
It's not. Look, there's a lot of promotion of Ultra, but there's a few things worth noting. One, EDM was new in America, but has existed for a long time in a pretty similar form, or pretty similar forms, I should say, different genres in Europe and around most of the world. Although how it started technically in America with Frankie Knuckles and all these people, It came over to Europe and was quickly more popular there than it was in the States. As such, festivals like Tomorrowland are generally held in higher esteem. But it's a rather strange thing to act as if EDM is this new thing that's exploding as it was presented in the documentary. It's just not America's culture. It kind of never really has been. If you haven't watched the documentary, there's a part that I was hoping to be all hipster about, but unfortunately they covered it, where Avicii debuted a bunch of new songs by having them played live in the second half of his set at Ultra Music Festival.
Miami Ultra Music Week is coming, and Tim said, I'm headlining the whole thing. I'm going to debut the album, and it's going to be all the singers performing it with me.
And he was booed. Choruses of boos.
And fucking boos. People were booing. And the guys I'm around, I'm in the middle of the place, and they are just like dumbfounded. This is the weirdest thing I've ever heard.
In a documentary, to be honest, it was kind of not really shown quite how bad the booing was and quite how bad the reaction was at the time. And it continued to be bad on social media. It was really, really harsh, to say the least. That failed Ultra set is sad because it's very indicative of a crowd mentality that, again, Americans are very guilty of, but kind of everyone is. Everyone wants to hear songs they've heard before. There's something multiple times DJing various events where I'd have some annoying request, frankly, of, can you play something we've heard before? Now, as a music purist, you kind of sit there and think, do you not want to hear cool new songs that you might like? No. People want to hear what they've heard before. And while I do sort of understand it, the idea that an artist taking what's clearly a risk is going to get booed off the stage is very, very sad.
I'll just get ready. I'll play 4 or 5 songs and they just don't make a sound. I'll just go, boo. And then Albert will come and go, boo.
The same things kind of happened to Ed Sheeran when he started doing his whole loot box style of playing a gig. It's a kind of depressing little circle, but anyway. The saddest part about that festival that clearly had a deep and worrying impact on Tim.
I have like a headache.
Had he done the exact same thing when the songs were already out there in the world, as super popular as they became, the crowd would have loved it, they'd have ate it up. They didn't because it was new. That's the sad reality. For those of you who watched the doc, I think we all knew where it was going, where you had the artist and the industry pushing for product, pushing for something to sell. Make stuff, make it quickly, make it the way you made it before, and the artist wants to do new things and explore and doesn't want to be rushed because, oh, you have to go touring again soon, so you only get this much studio time, and oh, well, we can't get that artist there at the exact right moment, so you can't wait or reschedule, just do it with someone else or do it by yourself or whatever, just give it something new to sell. That frustration is something that was obviously going to be there for him, and I definitely think it's one of the things that led him to quit this pressure to constantly move and not be allowed to sit back and let songs take their time to materialize. To quote the man himself, artists are peoples, they are creators.
And then they're thrown into an environment and an industry
where it's all about chasing how many views you have, how many comments. It's become
almost impossible to stay away from.
Well, that's only gotten worse, unfortunately. And I mean, we can see it now in YouTube, social media, hell, in a lot of jobs that are to do with marketing. It's now about social media views. I have a video whinging about social media already, so you can check that out if you feel like it. I also had a script about the number, which was this idea that everything you do creatively now gets turned into chasing algorithms, and it all becomes about trying to replicate your formula because you have to please the algorithms and therefore have the number go up.
You can't have a single meeting with someone in the industry without them mentioning 60 times different statistics and why this is better than that.
And so many creative people get stuck in this loop where the number kind of becomes everything.
I keep hearing the fucking numbers!
And it's bizarrely fun for me to hear someone who I'm starting to see is similar to me venting extremely similar frustrations at similar people. It's vindicating, I suppose. If you want to kind of sadly sum up the industry, there's a moment where he goes off into a room by himself, closes the door, needs a minute alone, and a woman goes to the door and says,
Tim, are you okay? We have 1 minute till showtime.
That's crushing. Someone who's mentally really struggling. The way I suspect he will have heard that is, Tim, you need to go on and make money. You need to go and play for us. You can't have a moment alone. You have to go and do your thing.
We've got to have money.
It's very much dance monkey, dance monkey, dance monkey. And it's a funny thing how this person could be such a huge artist and in theory have all the things you could ever want in the world, and yet somehow be so powerless in his own life.
Money has never been the motivating factor for me, ever. The only real monetary goal I've had was the freedom that money gives you. But I felt that freedom after I was able to take a cab everywhere I want and go out and eat and pay rent.
One thing that's quite funny is his friend Jesse in the documentary says,
I remember telling him one time, Tim, how do you even feel this way when you're making more money in one show that people make in 5 years? Like, you should just be happy with your life.
And I immediately said to my wife, what an American thing to say. What an incredibly American outlook to think that money just magically solves anything that's going wrong in your life. And we know from years and years of experience of people who are very, very wealthy being very, very unhappy, that just isn't true. Obviously, a lack of money is going to make you unhappy because you can't afford food or clothes or shelter. But having an excess of money doesn't magically make you happy. It never has, it never will, and someday the Americans will figure that out. And it's especially funny that I said all this to my wife, and then almost immediately in the documentary, he says it himself when he retires.
Avicii set to retire age just 26 after making $50 million. Det är såhär jäkla syn på det. Exakt, det är bara bra.
Great minds, I guess. And all of this got me thinking that I'm convinced the best place to actually be in a career is on the way up. The numbers getting bigger. You feel like you're making progress towards this goal of making it, this nebulous idea of success. And the problem is, again, as we've seen with a lot of successful people, they get to the top of the mountain and find that there's nothing really there. And it's a strange thing. Being very, very successful often leads people to this feeling of emptiness because there is nothing to strive for, not really. There's a much wider conversation you could have about making more money. I know a lot of Wall Street types who say that the only amount of money that's enough is more. No matter how much money they ever make, they'll need to make more because they're stuck in that loop of chasing. In the same way for music makers, you're always trying to make a better song, you're always trying to do more, and at some point you burn out on that because burnout is the feeling that your effort doesn't get matched by rewards. And how can it possibly be matched by rewards when you can't go any higher? There is nothing new to strive for, so what is there to do?
And in my universe, this I achieved. But it gave me no satisfaction. In succeeding, I lost all purpose.
And again, that's made worse by this disconnect between the people you know thinking everything should be wonderful and your own internal feeling of hollowness. If you really want to tear up, by the way, go back and watch a lot of the DJs' sets when they find out. You'll find on YouTube Kygo or Tiesto or Hardwell or whoever it is reacting to Avicii's death. It's a really hard thing to watch because you realise that these guys are seeing not only a friend but a contemporary who really understands what it's like to be them, deciding that being them is too much to cope with.
Like, for me, the death of Tim was definitely the trigger for me to, well, pull the trigger myself and like, yo, I'm taking a break, that's it.
There's a real emotional weight for watching not only them but the crowds openly feeling the emotions that this death led to. And it is rough to watch. The tribute concert equally is very difficult not to cry at. The only comparison point I have for it is watching the Linkin Park tribute festival. They have a lot of guest singers at that, but for one song, Numb, they have no singer. It's just a spotlight and a microphone, and the crowd realise they have to sing, and it's incredibly heartbreaking to watch. So can I now answer that question? How is it we all miss someone so much when we never knew him? I don't think it's a parasocial relationship thing either. There's no part of my psyche that imagined that I actually knew the person in real life, that I had a relationship, a friendship with him. Maybe this is simply the nature of art, that we attach our own stories to this art, that we remember the years we spent listening to these songs, and so when we hear them again or when we think of the person who made them, we become emotional. As I said at the start, the art's still there. The songs are still there, so we can't just miss the artist who essentially still exists and always will. There's still something missing. We didn't know Tim, but we knew Avicii. Maybe that's part of the problem, that so many people loved Avicii that Tim felt lost in it, in the shadow of his own persona.
I didn't like being a persona. I didn't like having a persona. I didn't like having to be Avicii and then having to be Tim. I wanted to be the person who was up on that stage liking it. It's a really It's still very confusing. I still don't really understand it.
What we do know is that he's about as close as our generation has to a Cobain. Someone who took their own life at the height of their stardom. And like Cobain, we can learn a lot from his all too short life. The ancient Egyptian idea of dying twice crossed my mind. We die once and die again when we are remembered for the last time. For this man, there's 3 deaths, because the last memories of Tim will fade a lot earlier than the last memories of Avicii. And for me, hearing this music is not only a sense of nostalgia, but memories of dreams I'd long given up on. Lessons I've begrudgingly learned from these moments. A deep sorrow for the person who is suffering behind that artist, behind that mask. We can learn so much about the pressure of fame, the hollowness of making it, the danger of feeling isolated. All of this just reminds me to reach out to those friends once in a while, to reach out to everyone once in a while. It scares me that people I know may be struggling this way and I have no idea. I can only hope to be there for them in the tough moments in the same way that I'm sure Tim's friends wished they could have been there for him. And if you're the person having these thoughts, please reach out to somebody, talk about anything, find some way to even just spend time when you're having thoughts like this on anything else. Reach out to a helpline, do anything apart from finishing everything. Because there are people who care, there are people who will miss you terribly, and the world will always be brighter someday in the future. How can we miss someone we didn't know? It's the idea of them, I guess. It's what they represented as a person in our minds. It's what they meant to us at a certain stage of our lives. An idol, someone like us who was successful, someone who simply drew emotions out of us that we didn't find another way. Someone who created something we loved. Someone who we thought deserved all the happiness they could get, and it breaks all of our hearts to find out that happiness was unfortunately the last thing he found. As for the yin and yang of me and Avicii, he was massively successful. One of the most successful artists of his generation, yet he was so deeply unhappy. And it does make me wonder what would have happened for me. I now have a wife, I have a life, I'm still alive. I can root for my sports team. The day of recording this, the Rams are going to play the Eagles, and, well, most people aren't giving us a chance, but you know, we live in hope. As for whatever musical talent I have, I think I'm going to reopen my music software and try and make songs again, if for no other reason than to try and experience that flow state, that joy that you only really find by making something that's never existed before you made it. Sure, maybe no one will ever care about what I make. Maybe the fact that I've had some of my own songs underneath this video won't even matter to anybody. Maybe the medley of melodies between Avicii's and my own tracks isn't as cute and nice a touch as I thought it was. Maybe people will never care. I'll certainly never be the success that Avicii was, but maybe the happiness I can bring to me and a few of my friends is enough. And maybe I should plug my music channel here, I guess. I'll upload to it soon, maybe. Meanwhile, I'm still gonna miss the man I never met. As bizarre as that is, it really makes me wonder what would have happened to me if I had found that agent, if I had some sort of successful music career. Would I still be here?